He took the house, the car, even the dog. But he left me with something he didn't notice, his last name, still clinging to my license, my bills, like dust on a life I no longer lived. This isn't a story of what I lost. It's about the moment I chose to take back what was always mine. My name is Elaine. At least, that's what my mother called me, before I ever became anyone's wife. For 17 years, I organized campus events, planned other people's dreams, and kept my own tucked in the drawer with expired warranties and wedding vows. After the divorce, he got the house. He got the keys. He got the Labrador I raised like a child. And I walked away with a suitcase, some silence, and a name that wasn't even mine. At first I didn't notice. You don't when you're busy surviving. But one April morning, I stared at an electric bill addressed to Mrs. Carter and asked aloud, "Who is she? And what does she still owe?" That was the day I realized I didn't want to fight. I didn't want to reclaim. I just wanted to remember how it felt to sign my name and mean it. And so I began. The envelope was plain, cream-colored, thin. It had that texture, slightly rough, like it had been handled too many times in too many machines. It was nothing, really. Just the electric bill. I opened it without thinking, the way you do when life becomes muscle memory. The kind of habit that survives grief, fatigue, and even divorce. But when I unfolded the page, there it was, staring back at me in bold block letters. Elaine Carter. I stared at that name longer than I should have. It wasn't mine anymore. Not truly. It had stopped being mine the day the judge asked, "Do you understand the terms?" And I nodded, without looking at the fine print of identity. The house wasn't mine. The car wasn't mine. Not even the damn dog was mine. But this name was still following me like a shadow no one else could see. It was on my mail, my license, my prescription bottles. Each one a quiet echo of a life that had been dissolved legally, but not yet personally. I folded the bill, set it on the table, and for a moment, I just sat there, bare feet brushing the cold tile floor, wondering how many more mornings would come with someone else's name stitched into mine. The kitchen smelled faintly of old wood and instant coffee. Light from the east window spilled onto the table, washing over the folded bill like it could bleach out the name. I sat with my hands wrapped around a chipped mug, the only thing I took from the old house without asking. No one knew, of course, that I still flinched when someone called me Mrs. Carter in line at the pharmacy, that I paused before signing anything, not because I forgot, but because I no longer felt like I belonged to the letters on the page. Elaine Carter. It wasn't a bad name. It just wasn't mine. Not in the way it used to be when I whispered it on honeymoon postcards or wrote it in the margins of grocery lists. Now, it felt like wearing someone else's coat. Same size, wrong scent. I had let him keep the things he fought for. Let him win the battles he thought mattered. But in doing so, I had let something slip. Not stolen, not lost. Just slowly surrendered. And I hadn't even noticed until a bill arrived and reminded me that I had become a placeholder in my own life. I took a breath. Not deep, not dramatic, just enough. Then I whispered into the quiet kitchen, "I think I want my name back." It was room 304 at the county courthouse. The air smelled like old paper and carpet cleaner. Everything looked beige, walls, folders, emotions. Even the clock above the door ticked softly, like it didn't want to interrupt. I remember thinking, this is what the end of a marriage looks like? This quiet? No thunderclaps, no last-minute confessions. Just two people sitting on opposite sides of a long table, each flanked by an attorney who didn't know how we met. He wore a navy blazer, one I had picked out for his job interview 10 years ago. I wore a cardigan with a loose thread I kept twisting between my fingers. Neither of us made eye contact. They read through the terms like grocery items. The house, his. The car, his. The dog, his. The antique bookshelf I inherited from my grandfather. Too large to move. Better if it stays. The patio set we bought together in Charleston. He uses it more. He didn't raise his voice, didn't gloat. He simply said, "It's just easier this way." Easier. As if the measure of fairness was convenience. As if letting go of things I'd chosen, cleaned, loved, could be justified because it made his weekends less stressful. I nodded. Again. And again. Like a metronome with no music. My lawyer gave me a look, a gentle check-in, but I didn't flinch. I wasn't there to fight. I was there to be done. When they slid the final page across the table, I paused for half a second and signed Elaine Carter with a trembling hand. The last time I would write it while still married, the first time it didn't feel like mine. He didn't look up. Just reached for the pen to sign his part, then asked the clerk if they could validate parking. And that was that. No ceremony, no final words. Only the sound of paper sliding into a manila folder and the quiet click of a door shutting behind someone who used to say he loved me. I left the courthouse alone, walked down the steps in flats that pinched slightly. No one waited for me outside, no arms, no friends, just a gray sky and the hum of traffic. The first thing I did was buy a coffee I didn't want. The second was call my mother and hang up before she answered. The third was look down at the receipt and see it again. Elaine Carter. The world didn't know I had just become untethered. It still called me by the name that no longer had a home. I tucked the receipt in my coat pocket, like a bruise that hadn't turned purple yet. The studio apartment was smaller than our old laundry room. One window, one stove, one chair. Enough space for breathing, but barely. I moved in with one suitcase, a second-hand kettle, and a spine made of silence. No grand declarations, no fresh paint. Just me, the echo of a life I used to live, and mail that kept arriving with the wrong name. Elaine Carter. Every letter, every app notification, every polite call from the pharmacy. It was like the world hadn't gotten the memo, that I was no longer that person, no longer his. I didn't tell anyone. Not my old coworkers who still sent me emails with Mrs. Carter in the subject line. Not the neighbor who smiled kindly and asked if my husband would be joining me later. I didn't correct them. I didn't have the energy to correct anyone. I just nodded, small, and returned to my tea. Some nights, I pulled out old bank statements and crossed my name out in pen, just to see what it looked like. A little act of erasure that felt oddly comforting. But names are like dust. You can wipe them from windows, but they return, settling into the corners of everything you thought you had cleaned. Sometimes I'd catch my own voice on the phone, saying Carter out of habit, and flinching, as if I'd told a lie I didn't mean to tell. I wasn't waiting for someone to notice. There was no audience, no applause, no reunion on the horizon. It was just me, trying to figure out what it meant to be unclaimed and whether that might finally be a kind of freedom. I didn't feel brave. I didn't feel reborn. I felt transitional, like a sentence that hadn't decided how to end. And somewhere in that quiet, I began to wonder, what would it mean, not just to erase the name, but to reclaim the one I had left behind? It started with a search bar. I had been paying a bill online, another one addressed to Elaine Carter, when a tiny line of text below caught my eye. Update your legal name. I clicked it. Out of curiosity, maybe out of restlessness. It led to a government site. Cold fonts, no photos, no slogans, just forms. To change your legal name, begin by filing a petition for name change at your local county courthouse. That night, I didn't sleep. I laid on my narrow mattress, listening to the refrigerator hum like a nervous guest. The thought rolled over and over in my mind, like a tide that didn't care whether I was ready. Could I do it? I wasn't trying to disappear. I wasn't trying to spite him. I just wanted something to belong to me again. The next morning, I ironed the one blouse that hadn't wrinkled too badly. I gathered my original birth certificate, which I had kept in a manila folder next to an old passport, and a photo of my mother holding me at 6 months old. She had written in blue ink on the back, Elaine Maddox, 1980, before she belonged to anyone else. I stared at that line for a long time. Then I folded the photo and tucked it into my bag. No one offered to come with me. I didn't ask. There's a kind of strength that grows in the quiet, not the fire-breathing kind, but the moss-on-stone kind. Slow, patient, unnoticed by most. The courthouse looked the same as it had during the divorce. Same beige walls, same slow clock. But this time, I wasn't escorted by an attorney. I stood alone in line at the clerk's office, holding my documents like they were proof that I once existed under another sky. The clerk was young, efficient, barely looked up. "Name change petition?" she asked. I nodded. "Returning to my maiden name," I said quietly, like it was a confession. She passed me a packet of forms and pointed to a corner table. "You can fill it out here. Make sure to sign in both spots." I sat down. It took me longer than it should have. Not because the forms were complicated, but because I hadn't written the name Elaine Maddox in over 17 years. My hand hovered above the paper. The M felt foreign. The X at the end felt final. But as the pen touched down and my handwriting looped into something familiar, I felt a warmth rise in my chest. Something between nostalgia and relief. I signed both lines, then exhaled. The clerk stamped everything with a thick blue seal. "Your hearing's in 2 weeks," she said. "It's usually just a formality." As I walked back to my car, the world looked no different. Same stoplights, same cracked sidewalks. But I held in my hand the beginning of something irreversible. Not revenge, not rebirth, just return. Courtroom 2B wasn't dramatic. There was no judge's gavel slamming against wood, no audience leaning in to catch a verdict. Just a few rows of chairs, 2 ceiling fans, and a clerk who offered a plastic pen on a chain. I sat near the back, clutching my file. Inside, the petition, my birth certificate, the photo of my mother holding me in a white knit blanket. She wasn't here, but her handwriting was. Elaine Maddox, before she belonged to anyone else. They called other cases before mine, mostly name changes for newborns, corrections for typos, a couple switching their last name to match their business. People smiled, took selfies afterward. When my name was called, Elaine Carter, I stood. It was strange, rising to a name I was about to leave behind. The judge looked down at the papers. He was older, glasses low on his nose, the kind of man who probably preferred fishing to formality. "You're petitioning to return to your birth name?" he asked without lifting his eyes. "Yes, Your Honor." "No criminal history, no pending cases, no liens, no intent to defraud?" "No, sir." He paused, tapping his pen once against the desk. Then he nodded. "Petition granted. Please follow the clerk for your certified copies." That was it. No questions about why. No small talk. Not even a smile. I stepped out of the courtroom into the hallway. The door closed behind me with a soft click, as if sealing something off. I stood there for a moment, holding the new paperwork in my hands, the first document in over a decade with Elaine Maddox written at the top. It felt official, but more than that, it felt correct. No one was there to clap, no friend waiting to hug me, no camera to mark the occasion. But I didn't need witnesses, because something quiet and sacred had just happened. I had stepped out of one name and returned to another, not to reclaim the past, but to continue the story that had been paused. Back home, I placed the stamped documents beside my kettle. Then, from the bottom drawer, I pulled out a small cloth-bound book of poetry. It was my mother's. The cover faded, the binding cracked, but on the inside cover, still legible in her looping hand, to Elaine Maddox, before she was anyone else. I ran my fingers over the ink, and this time I didn't cry. I just nodded softly, as if some part of me, long exiled, had just walked back through the door. The next Monday, I took the morning off. I packed a small folder with my new court order, 2 certified copies, my birth certificate, and my driver's license, still bearing the name Elaine Carter in bold capital letters like a stubborn whisper from a past life. First stop, the DMV. The line was long, of course. It always was. But I didn't mind. I sat by the window, watching sunlight flicker through the blinds, tracing thin shadows on the tile floor. When it was finally my turn, I slid the paperwork through the glass partition. The woman on the other side, mid-50s, kind eyes, red nails, took a glance and raised her eyebrows just slightly. "Name change?" she asked. I nodded. "Congratulations," she said. No explanation needed. Just that. It landed softly, like a stranger handing you the exact words you didn't know you needed. When I signed the electronic pad, my hand hesitated. Elaine Maddox. I wrote it once, then once more, just to make sure it flowed. The first signature looked unsure, the second more fluid. By the third, it felt like mine again. At the bank, they asked for 3 forms of ID. I presented them like sacred offerings, each one now legally aligned with who I had always been beneath the borrowed name. The clerk was young and fidgety. She didn't look up, but when she handed me a new checkbook, the name printed across the top in crisp black letters, something caught in my chest. Not grief, not joy, just rightness. I updated my email next. Elaine.Maddox at. The old one had been tied to every PTA meeting, every insurance login, every vendor I used when I was still part of a household of 2. This new one felt quiet, unused, like a fresh snowfall. I sent myself a test email. Subject, "Hi." No message body. When it landed in my inbox, I stared at the sender name, Elaine Maddox. It looked simple, unremarkable, but it was the first time I had seen it in a digital space that belonged solely to me. I changed it everywhere I could. Utilities, voter registration, even the library card I hadn't used in years. Each time I was asked, "Are you sure?" And each time I said, "Yes, I'm sure." Later that evening, I sat at my small table with a blank notebook. I opened to the first page and wrote my name 10 times. Elaine Maddox. Elaine Maddox. Elaine Maddox. Not to prove anything, not to rehearse, just because I could. There's something strange about relearning your own signature. It feels like teaching your body to recognize itself again, as if your hand has to be reminded, this is us. This is ours. This is who we've always been. By the 10th time, I stopped writing. I just looked at the ink on the page and felt, for the first time in a very long while, like someone had come home. A week passed, and slowly the world began to reflect the shift. A new debit card arrived in the mail, sleek, simple, but in the top left corner, embossed in clean silver letters, Elaine Maddox. I ran my thumb over it like Braille. It felt unfamiliar, but only because it had been so long. The first time I swiped it at the corner grocery store, the cashier didn't even glance. Of course she didn't. To her, it was just another name on just another card. But to me, it was an echo becoming solid, a ghost stepping into flesh. The next change came in small things: my Netflix account, my water bill, even the label on my prescription bottle. This time, when I picked it up, the pharmacist said, "Miss Maddox?" I turned, startled for a second, then nodded quietly, "Yes." At home, I stacked the documents like a fragile altar. Driver's license, bank statement, email confirmation. Each one a page in a book I thought I'd lost the rights to write. There were no parties, no champagne, no social media posts announcing, "New me." Only stillness, only paper and ink, but finally in alignment with the woman who brewed tea at 7 a.m., who watched the light crawl up her wall like a quiet visitor. I didn't feel powerful, not in the way magazines describe it, but I felt visible. And that visibility didn't need to be loud. It didn't need a podium. It just needed a name. My name. The email was short. Subject: "Can't make it this week. Quick update. Hi all. Apologies for missing Friday's meetup. Some life admin caught up with me this month. We'll catch the next one. Warmly, Elaine." Only this time, it came from a different address. Elaine.Maddox at no announcement. No fanfare. Just a quiet correction in the reply field. A few friends noticed. Some didn't. One replied with a simple, "New email? New you?" I didn't respond. Instead, I went to the old group chat, the one we'd all used for book clubs, birthdays, and awkwardly shared memes. I typed, "Still me," just spelled correctly now. Then I put the phone down. No one asked what happened. No one needed to. The ones who knew me well would understand. The ones who didn't, well, I wasn't here to explain my resurrection to tourists. The world didn't tilt. Nothing crashed or broke or burned, but something settled, like a book finally shelved under the right author, like a letter forwarded to its rightful address, and me, still sitting at the same chipped table, sipping the same mint tea, but somehow finally present in the room. Some updates were simple. I changed my name on streaming services, on online orders, on the alumni directory I hadn't checked in years. Each form took less than 5 minutes. Each click, a small reclaiming. Others took longer, like convincing the insurance portal to accept a new identity without making me feel like I was vanishing. But over time, the digital version of me began to align. Elaine Maddox. Not a reinvention, just a reappearance. Of course, people still slipped. A neighbor waved one morning, calling out, "Morning, Mrs. Carter." I smiled, not because it was right, but because it no longer had the power to sting. At the pharmacy, the clerk hesitated. "Pickup for Carter?" I stepped forward anyway. "It's Maddox now," I said, then added gently, "No worries. It takes a while to stick." Some days, I didn't even bother correcting it, not because I accepted the error, but because it no longer defined the truth. The truth was in how I signed my name without flinching, in how my voicemail no longer stumbled, in how my handwriting curved differently now, not out of effort, but because I wasn't tracing someone else's outline anymore. There's a kind of healing that happens so quietly, even you don't notice it at first. Not until someone calls you by the wrong name and you smile. Not from pain, but from knowing they're speaking to someone who no longer lives here. The cafe was nothing special. A corner shop tucked between a hardware store and a dry cleaner. Chalkboard menu, mismatched mugs. A bell above the door that jingled a half-second too late. I came here sometimes on Sundays, when the world was quiet enough to hear myself think, but not so quiet I'd feel alone. I ordered chamomile tea. The barista smiled, recognized me. He didn't ask for a name. He never had to. I found a seat near the window where the sunlight caught on the rim of my cup like gold leaf. Outside, a breeze nudged leaves along the sidewalk in little playful spirals. When the check came, it was just a small slip of paper. $4.75. Tucked inside a leather folio that had probably been handled 100 times that day. I reached for the pen. No hesitation. No pause to remember what to write. Just Elaine Maddox. In my own hand, with no tremble in the wrist, no second guess in the heart. No one noticed. Not the couple talking softly beside me. Not the barista wiping down the counter. Not the girl behind me scrolling through her phone with earbuds in, but I knew. It wasn't the first time I'd signed that name again, but it was the first time it didn't feel like something borrowed or tentative. It felt inevitable, like the name had been waiting, patiently, for me to come back. I tucked the signed slip into the check holder, sipped the last of my tea, and looked out the window, not searching for anything, just being there, not erased, not claimed, just present, exactly as I was meant to be. That evening, I stood in front of the mirror with a notepad in hand. No makeup, no presentation. Just my reflection, soft in the golden hour light, and the sound of my pen clicking open. I wrote it once. Elaine Maddox. Then again. No loops too wide. No tilt to the left like I used to do when nervous. No backspace instinct. No whisper of hesitation in the curve of the M. Just firm, clean letters, straight lines, full stops. A name that had finally grown back into my bones. I didn't smile, didn't cry. I just looked at it, the way you look at something that belongs to you after a long absence. Not new, not surprising, just right. I had spent years folding myself into someone else's name, and years before that, shrinking to make others comfortable. But this was not a reclamation. It was a return to a name that didn't need a court to approve it, or a judge to stamp it, or an ex-husband to release it. Only me, only this hand, only this breath. I didn't need to reclaim anyone, didn't need to prove anything. I just needed, once, to write my name without asking permission, and I did. Some people reclaim their lives with noise, a speech, a ring, a public post that says, "I'm back." I didn't need any of that. I just needed to walk through the world without flinching when someone asked for my name. I needed to sign it once, without shame, without tremble, without checking the room for approval. And I did. Now, I move differently. Not louder, not stronger, just more wholly. My mail comes with the right name. But more importantly, my thoughts do too. There's no more explaining, no more used to be, no more still going by, just me, Elaine Maddox, a name that doesn't reach backward, doesn't ask permission, doesn't apologize for existing. It fits in my mouth the way my breath does, quiet, steady, mine. And if no one remembers the woman I used to be, that's fine. Because I do, and I forgave her for staying silent so long, for shrinking to fit someone else's frame. She was trying her best, and I've brought her home,